So let's get started. Call this under order. Invite the Prime Minister to the floor to introduce the motions to the hearing.
For many people, the fear of death is something that's crippling. It's something that takes away the happiness that they can experience in their lives. It means that they plan terribly for the rest of their lives, and generally reduces the quality of people's lives in a way that we think we can eliminate, given that you live under a world where people just know this. We think we have a whole host of positive outcomes for them that we're going to be discussing in this debate. We're going to break down into a couple things. One is on the individual level, why you get better life planning for yourself, on your family. We're also going to talk about why governments are now structurally able to account for their populations in ways that they previously aren't, and why that leads to positive outcomes for everybody. So briefly on the model, I think the motion was fairly clear. We're going to assume you live a reasonably healthy lifestyle. So if you start smoking cigarettes, chain smoking them when you're 16, you're probably going to have a lower life expectancy. This is just the normal, reasonable life expectation we think. There should be no questions there. So I want to begin by talking about why we think this makes things better for individual life planning and the types of happiness that we can bring to people. So note that you have many populations in the world that are presently unhappy because they don't know their life expectancy. So for the elderly, for instance, yes, actually.
Would you be making this data public?
So in terms of that, we think that there would likely be some sort of polling from governments to try and figure this out. Our second point on government policy does rely on that, so we're happy to say, we'll know about this kind of thing. Individuals will certainly know, governments probably too. So we think that many groups are vulnerable to not knowing their life expectancy. The elderly are a particularly good example, but this applies to everybody. What we think we give to everybody here is a sense of peace and serenity when you know that your life is going to end. We think that oftentimes the problem with death is the uncertainty around it and what happens to the people around you. So am I taking good enough care of my family members? What will happen to my dog when I die, right? These are important questions that people have that they need to plan for. So on that first point, individual life planning. People, we think, make better decisions with more information, and that all of our lives from an economic perspective are trying to optimize over a certain time period. The problem when you have uncertainty in the time period, if you say the expected value of your time as opposed to your actual life expectancy, is you get those decisions wholly wrong, right? So what are some of these? The first one is financial decisions. So people at present make terrible decisions when it comes to planning for their pensions, right? They consume far too much when they're, say, 30, and they save nothing for when they're 60, and that leads to terrible problems in terms of gaps in the fiscal deficit when it comes to funding pensions and all those sorts of things. We think, thank you, you entirely eliminate that when you allow people to know that I have 40 years to live and therefore I need to plan for it in this way. It makes it concrete and real for them, which tangibly means that when they're 60 and they're not receiving welfare from the government, they're able to support themselves and have food and pay for their medicine. This is an important benefit that we get that they don't. But secondly, on financial planning, I think it leads to a lot more happiness in people's lives when they can finally decide how to optimize sort of the split of their lives. Oftentimes what you have people doing is saying, you know what, my 20s are going to be kind of crappy. I'm going to work a job that I don't really like for 60 hours a week, but it'll be okay because, no thank you, when I'm 50 or 60, it'll be great and I'll have that. You have a massive amount of uncertainty there, and it's a terrible situation where you have somebody who's 65, has a nest egg, and is finally retired, and then they die suddenly of some sort of complication that they could have otherwise known of. We think you massively improve these people's lives when they can plan for that. What this leads to, we think, is people actually pursuing their passions and what they want to do when they know that they have a limited amount of time to live. We think this massively improves. The third thing I think is just on an economic level, consumption smoothing. I think we get a lot better under our side of the house. So what's the idea here? It's that if in your lifetime you're going to make X amount of dollars, you should broadly consume that in equal amounts, because when you're 65 years old and you have $500,000, it's tough to do a lot with that. Probably should have bought that nice car when you were 20. That's the idea behind consumption smoothing. We get that under our side of the house. So on the individual level, we think we're clearly winning here. I'll take a POI if you guys have one.
Yeah, so what do you think this planning actually looks like?
I mean, you sit down, you realize, okay, you sit down with your advisor, when I'm 65, this is going to happen. Let me plan to work until I'm 40, and here's how I'll save enough to make it work, right? You just have more information to make that. Whereas right now, people might look at averages and say, okay, the average person of my demographic has this type of life. But that's a terrible metric, because even if, in expectation, you should be the average on an individual level, it's unlikely that you'll be the average, and that's what we allow people to account for. So on family planning, right, we get a couple of things here. Firstly is planning when you're going to have kids and marry. From a family perspective, we think that's particularly important, and you allow people to plan for that in ways that they previously couldn't. The second thing, I think, is actually caring about illness, and this is an important example here, right? So oftentimes what you have is if you have a child, let's say, they're 9 years old, no thank you, they know their broader life expectancy, and they have an illness, and we're unclear whether or not, if with the right treatment they could survive over the next 20 years, or if not. Oftentimes you rely on these sort of hazy metrics of, oh, your doctor and your sort of moral position thinks that this is the right thing to do and we should medicate, and you can go through a lot of pain in the short term, but maybe you'll survive in the long term, right? This oftentimes leads to bad outcomes where maybe the child just won't survive, and that's a terrible thing because people experience more pain than they otherwise would have had to. We eliminate that when you have certainty about this issue. We think that's important. Furthermore, what we think happens under their side of the house is that because people are so afraid of death, they buy into all sorts of scamming programs where people are, look, we can extend your life expectancy through this sort of weird homeopathic treatment, and people get exploited in that route because they're afraid of death. We entirely eliminate that when you give people certainty. So that's all benefits on the individual level. The second thing I want to speak about then is the government and why we think we improve society as a whole before.
Do you think that people with terminal illnesses now aren't afraid of death?
So regarding terminal, so you feel like the worst stage of an illness, right? You can be fairly certain you're going to die. That's terrible. We're talking about cases where it's broadly unclear and we give clarity, right? That's the marginal case that matters here. So with governments, two things are important. Firstly, we think voting becomes much better in terms of political structures and incentives for individuals and for politicians. So with individuals, when you know what your life expectancy is going to be and you have a clear benchmark on that, you're far more likely to actually take it into account when you're voting. So it's one thing to see a statistic that you'll probably live till you're 65. It's another to know the specific date at which you will pass away and to be able to make voting decisions off of that. What that looks like in reality then is probably less short-term things on voting for tax cuts because you'll have to fund them in the future, and more things like, let me care about environmental regulation because I know when my child will be around for. That's an important voting structure. We think that politicians are subject to a similar appeal, where the politician that does better is the one that can plan for this and allow people to understand that part of their life. The second thing we think we better calibrate for is oftentimes the insurance market that exists within these areas. So things like pensions and planning, things like life insurance. Again, the problem when they're estimated on the means is that people don't actually get the proper market value of what they should be paying in terms of an insurance policy. They vastly overestimate the amount of money that they, for instance, should be getting insurance for, and that means that the quality of their life is presently bad. It's important to note that these organizations oftentimes have an incentive to sell you the most expensive plan and one that will massively overshoot the amount of coverage that you actually need, which ultimately means that people are getting exploited in the short run because they don't have this long-term vision where insurance companies, for instance, can aggregate that, individual people can't. Ultimately, we provide the ability for individuals to plan for the short run and the long run, which makes them happier people, makes them richer people, and they'll pursue things they actually want to, which makes overall our society better. Very happy to propose.
Sorry, 1 second before we move on. When you're ready.
Are we good?
Yeah, thank you.
Panel, it's great to see that Alex is paying attention in intermediate microeconomics class. The problem is that he hasn't taken a single ethics class, and he doesn't really understand what the comparative in this debate is. Because look, most people generally know when they're going to die. That is to say, if you live in Bangladesh, you know that the life expectancy is 65 and you're likely going to die somewhere around then. If you live in the United States, you know the life expectancy is like between 75 and 80, and you know you're generally going to die then. The important stakeholder in this debate then are the people who previously thought they were going to die along the average age of the people in their country, but now die much earlier. That's the stakeholder they need to address, not the stakeholder of not the person who can now plan for their retirement, etc. So a couple of things that then we're going to bring you on our side. We're going to tell you that people's capacity to find meaning in their lives comes from uncertainty, because that uncertainty breeds the hope that eventually they'll be able to do something great with their lives. But second, we're going to tell you that once you know you're going to die early, you lose the capacity to invest in meaningful relationships with people, because you hope those relationships last for the rest of your life. Before that, a couple things to take down on OG. Firstly, all their stuff on financial planning. Alex, this was just weird, right? Because a lot of stuff they said was people plan for when they're 60, etc. Couple responses. Firstly, but people already expect to live to 80, so they can already plan to live for when they retire. If they're bad at financial planning, then it's not as easy as you say. You can just sit down and suddenly become a good financial planner. If you can, that holds on your side too. But the second thing is, if anything, now that you know you are going to die very early, you have absolutely no reason to save, right? You have absolutely no reason to like invest in meaningful projects. We think that's actually awful. So what that actually means is you're likely to take on debt that you know that you don't have to repay later on because you're likely to die. So under your financial metrics too, you end up with like massively inflated, you like end up with economies that just have a lot of people taking on a lot of debt because they know they don't live with it. That's awful. The second thing they say is then you know like you can now, you know like how long your child is going to live, and that's a great thing. Look, that's actually awful because we say parents should care about their kids even if they know that their child is going to die early. The problem is on your side, when you know that your child has a terminal illness and doesn't live as long as the others, you're like far less likely to invest like emotional capacity in them, like have meaningful relationships in them because you know that they're not going to be able to like be returns on the kinds of investment that Alex values. Here's the second thing they bring. They say people like lobby on the basis of how long they live. We think actually it's great that you think you're going to live in the long run because you care about things like the environment, you care about things that last for generations, so you don't actually want massive tax cuts. The problem is if you know that you're going to die early, that's a massive issue. Look, there's already short-termism within the economy and within the political system. They just increase that massively. We don't like that at all. I'll take closing.
What parent thinks of their child as a commodity? They need to hope they live to a certain age and we're not going to love them and throw them out on the street because what's the point?
So the kind of parent that Alex imagines, that's the first response, but also, like more importantly, we do think that this is the kind of thing that tends to happen in relationships. Not because you tend to view your children as commodities, but you also, like, there are often times when you have like multiple children, you have to make like meaningful decisions about how much to invest or like whether to like spend a lot of time in like trying to like you know pay for their medical care, etc. Like these are hard decisions and people have to make these decisions sometimes. We're not saying they'll always throw their kids out, but it does get hard. Cool. A couple of things that we're going to talk about. Firstly, how people like, we're going to tell you that people lose the capacity to find meaning in their lives. We're going to tell you that most people derive meaning from their potentiality. That is, they think that one day they're going to be able to do something great. They're going to be able to transcend their existence right now into something that's greater. The way we transcend our existence is by looking at the future, by knowing that as human beings, we have this limitless capacity that we can project further. That actually stops when people can't see themselves. Look, this is super important. What gets people through the day today is knowing that even if you're working 2 jobs and it's not great and you have 3 kids and you don't have any leisure time, you just hope that one day you'll be able to save up and you'll be able to do better, then you'll be able to be in a better position than you are now. How does this change? Now you have a certainty of death and you know exactly when you're going to die. That excludes your ability of being able to think of yourself in the future. That means if you're 35 and you're in a terrible position, you know you're going to die at the age of 40, there is absolutely no reason you want to carry like on for the next 5 years because you know that like the kinds of things that you're doing right now aren't ever going to pay off. We think that's absolutely terrible. Look, the way through you get through is through the uncertainty of life, not knowing when you're going to die, not knowing how long you're going to live. You think you're going to live for a long time, so you know that it'll always get better. Even if that means that you'll have only like 10 or 15 years of leisure time afterwards, that's still fantastic. That allows you to get through the day. We think now your days become like necessarily unsatisfactory. Just the knowledge, less the certainty of death gives you far less reason to believe in that. We also think this really harms productivity in a number of ways. Three mechanisms here. So firstly, we think people work and are motivated to assume and like save because they know that in the future it's going to pay off. Apply the analysis I gave you earlier in Republic. The second thing is the ability to like imagine and to like imagine an escape from your day-to-day dreary existence helps you get through the day of like 9 to 5 jobs. But the third thing is we think like you feel more than like a cog in the machine, right? Like you know that like now you're just defined by your labor hours because you know that's all there is. We think that's awful. No thanks. I'll take opening.
So you want to talk to the individual who realizes they now have a shorter lifespan than they previously thought. That means that they stop working their cog in the machine job and they decide to do things that they actually like with their lives that are outside of the house. Under your side, they work thinking they'll live to the mean and then never enjoy their lives.
No, but you never give us a capacity to be able to do that in the first place, right? There's no reason why like just knowing that that's going to happen allows you to change that. That's what we're going to tell you. We also think this is massively important for the way in which people see themselves. Even if they're pursuing the kinds of projects that you do want to talk about, if they know they're going to die at 40, that just massively limits their potential to be able to pursue them, and they know that, and we think that just makes them feel really shitty. But also more importantly, note that we think like poor people, for instance, are like because of like natural causes such as like genetic markers or things that Teja will talk about more, are like far more likely to have like shorter life expectancies. What that then means is that we think that's a shift in incentives for how corporations and governments like value professional development within people that are far less likely to live longer. That is to say, you just want to invest less in these like human capital resources. So no note, for instance, that the government, under utilitarian mechanism, no longer wants to value poor people as much because you know that you're going to live a lot shorter, and we think that's awful. But also, there's the second thing. We think you lose the capacity to form meaningful relationships. Look, Alex and Archie won't know this, right? But there's something fantastic that you get out of meaningful relationships, just in knowing that you have a partner for life, knowing that this is somebody you invest in. Know that the idea of being with someone for life is instituted within the concept of marriage as we see it in the West today. Why do you lose this? If you know you're going to die, you don't want to hurt the people you're with, so you never actually get into these meaningful relationships in the first place. Or people want to know that the person they're going to be with is going to be around for a while. What that then means is people who die early are no longer able to invest significant potential and time and etc. in relationships. We think that's awful because we think even though those relationships end early, you derive meaning from those things. That literally your meaning in life comes from the way you're able to define yourself in relation to other people. We think that's a fundamental part of human existence. There is no reason to arbitrarily deny that to people who are going to die early for reasons beyond their control. For those reasons, we're so happy to be done out.
Thank the speaker for those remarks and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to present the defense Gov's case here.
Every day, too many people die knowing that they screwed up. They lived a life that wasn't the one they wanted to live because they didn't make the right choices. They lived a life where they didn't go on those extra holidays with their kids because they're working too hard in their 9-to-5 job, even though they're dying far too early. Ultimately, this debate is about making people make the most of their lives in the best possible way. So I'm going to go through what we heard from the other side, explain why it's largely incoherent, and then deal with our side as well. I'm glad Ved's been reading lots of Jean-Paul Sartre. Unfortunately, it's the reason people don't read him anymore. Cool. Or do, but don't really listen to him. Anyway, cool. So, firstly, this whole... Oh, and the last final thing to do before this. So, Alex uses lots of economic language. This is not exactly what Alex means. When Alex says, consumption smoothing, what Alex means is more money for you to have dinners with your kids. Just insert that into every kind of economic thing he means. Cool. Great. Glad that's out of the way. Firstly, meaning, uncertainty, Ved's intra-existentialism, all that great kind of stuff. Look, we think this is nonsense. There is very, very little happiness that comes from sitting in your dreary job and pondering in the abstract, wouldn't it be really, really wonderful if in 30 years' time I could do this? The reason, that's obviously very, very easy and liable to turn into very quick disappointment, the point at which you realise that that's entirely unrealistic and is going to remain just that, a fantasy. The way you change that is by having people make concrete steps towards realising that dream. So if your dream is, I don't want to be working this job, no thank you, rather I want to be spending time with my family, I want to be spending time with my kids. If your dream is, I don't want to be working this job, rather I want to be exploring the Amazon and looking at lizards. Literally any kind of, non-work kind of, thing that people have. Ultimately, the question is, how do people best get to a world where they're actually able to realise this? Because obviously, even if you buy their figuring out potential, the best possible thing is to actually ever realise that potential. We say people are more likely to do that on our side of the house. And the reason they can do that is that they know exactly when they're going to die. So if you know that I'm going to die, not at 80, but rather at 65, I'm going to have a heart attack a year after my retirement party, I know that I should probably push that retirement early because I'm going to need less money, and therefore I can spend that money over the 10 years I'm actually going to live, rather than necessarily just dying at that at a very quick point. But on a more kind of fundamental level, we just reject the notion that people actually find happiness or meaning through abstract considerations of potential. We think the things that actually make people want to get up in the morning, make people happy, make people fulfilled, is the genuine experiences of living and doing things. And that's fundamentally a more accurate account of the way people's lives actually work, the way people think. But yes.
Firstly, nobody marries you, so you can't go on a holiday with your kids. But even if you do, the very fact that you know when you're going to die, really makes it such that you can't derive meaning from things because you know that your capacity on this earth is limited.
I mean, everyone knows they're going to die, right? Like the limitation isn't the issue; it's the specifics. And Alex probably gives you a more plausible account of the fact that ultimately people can derive a lot of certainty and serenity from that, and that's something very valuable. Also, ultimately, these are all assertions about how people feel. In lieu of any credible analysis about assertions beyond that first level, default to our genuine analysis about economic planning, which at least is more reliable. On the marriage issue, I was going to talk about this earlier, but we'll push it up because why not? Look. Ultimately, a huge issue that we see right now is people, get married, fall in love, and then their partner dies far before they do, and they're trapped in an awful situation where they just, no thanks, feel awful as well. We think actually a really great side benefit of this is people can match up their expiry dates. People can know that I'm probably going to, die around this time, I'm going to die around this time, and that's another fact you consider when you're deciding whether or not you want to marry someone. This just avoids awful emotional traps. Again, the framing of all this analysis is that these are the biggest emotional decisions in any given person's life. Multiply this over literally every person in the world, this probably is more different than like any government policy ever. So even though it doesn't sound like it, it's actually a very high impact debate. Cool. I'll take closing.
Okay, great. So like, one of the things that you guys haven't dealt with is like, what if you're assuming people are already in relationships. Like, what if you want to have kids but you can't find someone, you're pushing too hard to find someone, you don't actually fall in love?
So honestly, like, if you really, really want to have kids, and you know that you need to get married and find a partner in the next like couple years to have kids, then we'd much rather you do that. You know, maybe you settle, and you know what, maybe that's fine, because the alternative is you push really, really hard to find love, then you don't have kids, and you die sad alone because you don't have kids you didn't want to. Like, these are the alternatives, right? This goes back to the kind of like, do you want to have unrealistic dreams and fantasies about your life, or do you want to actually have fulfilled real experiences? And we always kind of fall to the latter in terms of what we substantially want to do. Okay, so that's kind of the broader abstract stuff. Let's drill down to the more specific bits of analysis they gave us, explain why they don't work. Firstly, they say people know they're going to die early, therefore just take on a load of debt, and that's really, really, really bad. A number of issues with this. Firstly, obviously very strong incentives not to do this, not least the fact that debt, your family's handled with that's bad, all that stuff. B, you then need to find someone to lend money out to. We imagine very few people will be willing to do this, so that largely doesn't necessarily work. The more credible understanding of this is exactly what Alex was telling you, where you can just push your retirement date back and spend the 15 years going on holiday that most people do between the ages of 65 and 80, do that between the ages of 50 and 65 because you're more able to do that generally. Then there's this weird stuff about children, which I think our closing does a decent job of just credibility checking pretty intensely. But in general, we think that logic can be flipped exactly in the opposite direction, probably be made more credible as a result. Which is to say that your time is very precious for this child, and you're only going to be able to have meaningful moments with them for the next 10 or 12 years. At that point, you try to make sure that you can spend every second possible experiencing the most of what it means to be a parent with this child. And actually that means that you don't have people where their child dies of a terminal illness and they go, oh my god, I wish I could have spent more time with that child, I wish I wasn't doing this job, because people make those decisions. Ultimately, the broad takeaway again from all of this is, insofar as all people are different and process emotions differently, probably the common fact is if people have more information, they can make better decisions for whatever their own subjective experiences of those emotions are. We think those are in general pretty good. We then hear this kind of slightly weird stuff about kind of the poor and genetic markers, and I don't really, Taylor was going to go on to this, so no, I didn't really have time to respond to this. This was literally exactly what we're told, so you can't credit with it against us too much. But presumably the way this works is that everyone has roughly the mean expiry date for any given population, given we're all human, is going to be roughly the same, because the things that would lower it are likely to be. Don't run with that, it's really boring, and we thought about prep time, it doesn't really work. Look, here's the reason that doesn't work. This is really important. Okay. The way this works is that this is what is biologically built into your clock, and therefore is unlikely to vary on the grounds of race or socioeconomic background or gender or whatever. What this necessarily means, therefore, is that if you die substantially lower, which is likely to happen for disproportionate groups for all the reasons that I'm sure we're going to go into talk about environmental racism, whatever, then that doesn't influence that date, and insofar that's then no different from knowing the mean life outcome of that group and seeing that it's different from the mean life outcome of any other given group. But given that, we just think it's and this deals with the poor response as well, because insofar as you know that the mean life expectancy of the poor is in general is lower, we think exactly that same logic applies, and that broadly doesn't stand. The final thing I want to note is the issues about kind of political choice, and they want to claim that ultimately people know they're going to live a long time, thinking about the future anyway. Here's the key distinction. We make the future real for people in a way that doesn't happen. You know exactly the decade that is going to be the last decade of your life. That means it feels like a real period of time in a way no other period of time feels. That means people do things like vote for climate change policy in a far more proactive way, because the future isn't some weird, uncertain, existential Sartre weirdness, but rather it's people genuinely, coherently thinking, wow, I'm still going to be alive in this time, it better not be burning. For all those reasons, we're very happy to propose.
Yeah, 1 second. Great, okay, when you're ready.
Side government seems to think that this is information just like any other information you would have when making a decision. We told you your information about time of death is different in kind than any other type of information. That's because humans live their lives as tied to this idea of death, and when you don't know when you're going to die, every second of your life isn't spent thinking, oh yeah, I only have until 50 till when I'm going to die. We tell you that in their world, you necessarily change the way people live every second of their lives, where now there's this certainty as to how much meaning they can have in their lives and how much potentiality they can have in their lives. That's incredibly scary. For example, when my grandmother was told by her doctor that she had a week left to live, it's like, what are you supposed to do? If you're interacting with this grandmother, are you only doing it because they're going to die? Is there any meaning to this interaction? What is that individual person supposed to do except be terrified for an entire week? We think instead of people being able to make better decisions for themselves, it only creates terror when before they could have hope and optimism that is ultimately linked to this idea of not excluding potentiality for your life. What am I going to do in this speech? First, I'm going to talk about the sort of planning stuff that they talk about that maybe CG will also go for, and why it's actually going to make planning worse, why it's going to make it worse for you overall. Then I'm going to talk about meaning, and finally I'm going to talk about your interaction with broader society. So, first on planning. Note that in the status quo, the reason people are bad at planning is because people are just bad at financial planning. Like, people are extremely short-termist, they don't think about the future. Most people know, right, that they're probably going to live to be about 80, and that is something that they will assume in the status quo because that is literally what they're told. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to die at 40. I don't know that. I have no reason to know that. Instead, I think I'm probably going to live till 80. This is how long I should be saving, and I'll take you in a second. The reason that people would even contribute to insurance or the sorts of things that they think are good is because they have uncertainty, which is what gives people insurance, for example, and what gives people the ability to leverage risk in a way that actually makes people better off in terms of financial planning. What do they actually change on their side of the house? It means that people don't save and you don't get the sorts of insurance pools that are needed to be able to spread out risk in an effective manner, but it also means that people are so scared of the sorts of saving that's important that they often will be likely to not care about the effects on other people in their lives, which is probably going to tarnish relationships. Charlotte.
Will you be more or less scared of death when you know that it is definite and going to occur at some point in the future, or when you find out you're going to die in a week?
To be quite honest, I don't think about death in my everyday life right now, and I'm very happy for it to be that way and for me to not think about death all the time. I think it's much more scary for you to actually know that, like, hey, I really like this guy, but I can't actually marry him because his life expectancy is super long, and I'm not going to live that long, and will we be able to have kids, and will we be compatible? What will he say when he finds out? Those are really scary things that actually affect your everyday calculations that I don't think you're meaningfully engaging with. The final thing on this idea of planning is actually that if this data is actually so public, thinking about the actual way that people will be cared for by medical assistants and that sort of thing. There'd be no incentive to give people longer term care, and you're going to see people in terms of their expiry dates, which means that in terms of planning for them, it destroys relationships you'd have within families. This is also the stuff that I talked about before. So, we also just don't think why this is meaningfully important in terms of what you do at the end of the day. Because Archie tries to say oh, when people die, they often think they didn't achieve their potential in life. But the problem is not that people didn't know what time they were going to die. It's that people in the present just often don't think about the certain values that they would think about in the long term. For example, you think it's fun to work a specific type of job when later you're maybe I should have invested more in my kids or that sort of thing. We don't think knowing that you're going to die will solve that. If anything, it probably will start make people more short-termist and make them do more things that they're going to regret when they're actually on their deathbeds. But we also just think in terms of the weighing, the potentiality and the sorts of meaningful experiences you have every day are just going to outweigh that moment you have when you're dying and on your deathbed. The ability to live a fulfilling life and have meaning is just much more important. So, why are we better for meaning? I told you that people are able to have potentiality in their existence because they have this transcendent expectation about what their life is going to be like. That is, just the ability to hope and to imagine what a life could be like in the future is what lets you get through the day-to-day. If I'm waking up at 9 and going to work until 9 p.m. at this job, the ability to imagine that future is what allows me to do that. Now, side government might be oh, well, that people won't have to work those jobs and they won't actually be fulfilled in that way. The problem is in the status quo, often just to survive, people do have to work. You have to be able to put bread on the table to provide for your kids. You do have to be able to work if you want to have a functioning economy or any aspect of productivity. You can't escape that. If everyone just quits their job, we literally won't have a society that can provide people with the basic aspects of care that they need. So, and I'll take you in a second too. It means that people to be able to have the sorts of jobs that they need are going to require having to work. This is what lets people work and not feel like cogs in the machine and not feel like labor hours. Sure, I'll take you.
So you said this group is very, very small. Surely the state could provide welfare for a small group who are going to die very soon, as opposed to being a very large group.
Why would they do that? Politicians know they're not going to be voting for them in the long term. Why would they have any reason to appeal to those votes? If anything, it means that people who are going to live more in the short term are less likely to get political representation, and the sorts of people who have worse health or worse lifespans are going to be discriminated against. Which brings us to overall societal benefits, so new substantive. I think this is going to fundamentally change the way people work in the workplace. Why? We see a problem in the status quo with ageism where once people are a certain age, they're not promoted as much in their jobs and they're not likely to be treated well because the company doesn't think they're going to provide them a value in the long term. So for example, if someone who is a CS major is kind of old and wants to go back into the tech field, people don't want them because they're like, you're not young, you're not going to be in our company for a long period of time. The problem is that now a lot more people are given definite deadlines in terms of how long they're going to live and how early they're going to retire. So when Archie says like, hey, these people might retire early, yeah, companies see that too, which means now there's going to be more discriminate hiring based on that sort of thing. It also means now companies have an objective thing that is not like subjective or linked to race or gender or anything else that could be potentially discriminating explicitly to actually discriminate people on, and can use that as an excuse to do things like not hire them or not promote them because they say like, look, this person is just not as productive for us. We think fundamentally the essence of this is that when you give people a length of time that they're going to live, it reduces that person to the amount of labor hours that they can work. Like literally they are X amount of time that they can provide for society, and that's something that changes the way politicians and governments interact. Charlton.
Sure, so in the best case scenario for you guys, human experience is defined by coming up with projects, aspirations, and goals and all those things. Surely people enjoy that more if those projects are more tied to concrete reality and in some sense seem more genuinely attainable to them, which is possible, and they can more coherently plan out their lives as we said in our case.
Well, I don't think it's, like, for example, if you want to go vacation in, like, Costa Rica, you have to have money to do that sort of thing, and people can't escape the idea of having to work. If anything, it makes people more resentful of the things they have to do to provide for themselves and to provide for their lives, which we don't think gives them actual meaning. But this also doesn't respond to, like, the substantive that Fed gave you, which is that even if you're not living for a certain amount of time, the certainty of death is what makes you miserable. Like, the idea of eliminating and excluding this ability to imagine possibilities for yourself in the long term is what gives people a lack of meaning. And note that no amount of financial planning or the government caring is actually going to compensate for the fact that what people lack in the status quo is a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives, and they only make that worse. Like, no people who think that they're like going to quit their jobs to do good still sometimes don't find meaning in their lives. The ability for you to do that is because you can imagine what a future could be like, and they fundamentally exclude that. What do we get on our side of the house? First, you're not miserable every day because you know your deadline to date, and you're able to get like actual meaningful relationships with people and actually like create a sense of self that is good. And secondarily, it means that you don't screw up all the systems of insurance and governmental planning and well-being that will prevent people who need access to society getting that in the most optimal way. Proud to oppose.
Take the speaker for remarks and call upon the member of government to present his report bench.
Honey. Opening opposition made some serious strategic errors in this debate. Because it's not just about those who are going to die early. It's about everyone. It's about the fear that we feel when we're on our deathbeds, knowing every morning could be our last. The terror that creates for every single person when they are dying, and the horrible pain that it also creates for their families. This is not just how you plan your life, how you end it, and whether that end of your life is torture, or whether it's not. Moreover, the second strategic error of opening up is to base their grounds only on those who could not find meaning, who have not enough capital to find meaning to go on those vacations, to do their bucket lists. This means that their arguments are a vanishingly small number of people that I'm going to show you why our world actually allows for the correction of as well. So, engaging with that grounds on meaning with our first extension. Why meaning is likely to be significantly better on our side of the house. These debates change the world massively, and you have to take that into account. Recognize that public policy is likely to change to make sure that people who are going to die early actually are able to find meaning in their existences. Two reasons why this is the case. Firstly, people are not all immoral assholes who don't care about anyone who's not going to vote for them. We have some degree of moral feeling in our chests for those who are suffering. We want to reach out and help them to a greater degree. This means that there are probably individuals, often on the left, who will care about helping these individuals, given that you see increasing leftism across the Western states, which probably exists in our world as well. I think this is true. Second, recognize that you, too, know that you have a clock on when you're going to die. And you probably know that if you were in the position where your clock was significantly shorter, you would equally want someone to be able to step in and allow you to live the meaningful life that you otherwise would have denied to you. This means that there is a similarity in experience, an ingrained empathy, because all people know they are intuitively going to die at a certain date, which means that individuals are more likely to have the kind of public policy that means that you do allow poor individuals to go on those vacations, to spend time with their family, to live the meaningful life that they want. Here is the critical comparative. You are a 35-year-old, you're working a menial job, and you're incredibly poor, but you don't know when you're going to die. You don't have that same kind of shared experience that exists within the culture. So, you get to 40, and you die. The same that would occur on our side. But you don't get to live that meaningful life. You don't get that change in public policy. You just die. So maybe you have more potential meaning in the short term. But that potential meaning entirely collapses at the point at which you get your diagnosis that you're going to die in a month. Your entire edifice of meaning collapses. Everything you have built your life around. Our side is able to build that meaning in advance, to take into account the inevitability of death, which means that you don't get the existential collapse of meaning on our side of the house that makes people's lives feel absolutely worthless. So we're better for meaning. Go ahead.
When you're dying at 50, whereas everyone else is dying at 80, you're alone, it's unnatural, it's different, it feels scary, it affects every single decision you make, no matter how much time you have, you can't form the same meaningful relationship.
You can, because you can find someone else who's also going to die at 50 you can form a relationship with. But moreover, this is critical. Even if you are slightly scared of the fact you're going to die at 50, you've had your entire life to get used to this on our side of the house. Compare that to your side, where you get a week or a month to try to get used to the fact that you're going to die. This leads into our second extension, death in peace. Death is an existential terror. It is one of the worst kinds of terror that human beings can imagine. It's why we've created religions, in my view, and the edifice of the afterlife, in order to take into account these kind of factors of terror that death entails. This is critical. Because if you are dying, if you have cancer, you wake up, you see a sunrise, you're probably marginally happy about that. But you're also terrified that it's your last. And this means that the entire process of dying becomes utter torture, a cycle of perpetual fear that you're never able to escape from, because you are terrified that this is going to be the day that you die. Compare that to our side of the house. This doesn't happen. If you're on your deathbed and you're slowly dying, you know when you're going to die. So the process of dying becomes less emotionally torturous and mentally destructive. Moreover, this is actually really fundamentally important. There's an effect on your family that occurs from this as well. Because family members right now are left in a horrible bind. Either they sit by their loved one's deathbed every single day, so they do not miss the potential day on which they die. Or they only show up some of the time, and maybe that means that they miss their loved one passing away. This is a horrible bind. Because if they choose the first option, if they choose to sit by their loved one's deathbed, they experience these same kind of torturous cycles of existential terror that occurs for these individuals, sitting there all night, afraid that this will be the one where their loved one pass away. If they have the potential of missing their loved one passing away, this means that they have such a massive regret on their mind that they were not there with their loved one at the end of their existence. This is so horrible for individuals. Yeah?
If dying sucks. Like, you should prolong like the amount of time before you can think about this thing, right? Like, so presumably.
No. This is actually really critical. Prolonging the amount of time until you think about it means that the amount of time you actually have to get used to it is significantly lower. So the amount of time that you have to come at peace with the fact you're going to die, come at peace with when that's going to happen, adapt to the existential terror is significantly more on our side of the house than it is on theirs. Given how much of a terror it is for these individuals, allowing them to grow up knowing this is going to occur to them, to adapt to that reality, means that it's not going to be as harmful for them. This really matters, because everyone is affected. Everyone is doomed to die eventually. It's not the vanishingly small group that we want to talk about in OO, and it's not the individuals who cannot otherwise plan their lives of OG. It's everyone in this room, it's everyone we know who's eventually going to die. So that emotional pain is not just applied to a few people, it's applied to everyone that exists within the society. Another thing that I want to talk about in this speech. Some people live irresponsibly. They don't know how long they're going to live, so they discount the probability that they're going to live for an extremely long period of time. They take incredibly risky behaviors, drive recklessly, drink recklessly, do drugs, which leads to accidents and avoidable deaths that aren't factored into the natural expiry date. The point at which you know when you're going to die, the point at which you know for a certainty that if you live your life properly and do not take these kind of risks, you will live for 70 more years, is the point at which you're less likely to do those activities. And that doesn't just affect you, it affects the individuals you're doing those activities with, the person you crash into when you drive drunk. These are another type of things that we eliminate on our side of the house. Death is an existential terror. We make it more bearable for individuals. How to propose?
I'm going to seek your first remarks and call upon the member of opposition to accept the
So the entire Gov bench thinks that people are afraid of death because of the uncertainty of the moment at which it's going to occur. We would posit that people are afraid of death because we have no idea what happens to us when we die, right? So I don't think this debate is necessarily about that uncertainty and to what extent we can normalize that, but we're going to take them on their best case scenario in any case. So what I'm going to extend about is about why the future hugely causes anxiety to people, how this is going to affect and meaningfully worsen all of their relationships. And before I do that, I'm going to do some explicit points of refutation, right? So they say that the comparative is a 35-year-old poor white person who doesn't know when they're going to die and they actually only have 5 years left to live. Emma and I would say that person has camaraderie in their life. Just because you work at Walmart doesn't mean you don't have friends at Walmart, doesn't mean you don't have children who care about you and love you, right? We think that, furthermore, not having the expectation that you're going to die means that meaningfully no thank you changes the way that you engage in that life, right? Such that all the relationships you have are important rather than planning for future amounts of time, right? What we would say furthermore is like people are more miserable with being constantly reminded that they are going to die rather than living in illusions. Humans love lying to ourselves. We're really good at it, right? In fact, people say that people who have clinical depression have a realistic, no thank you, view of the world, and people who aren't clinically depressed tend to have an overinflation of the world, right? So humans are legitimately happier when they have illusions. So all the rest of my refutation is going to be integrated. So the first thing I want to talk about, no thank you, is to what extent is planning good, right? So from opening government and also from closing government, we get all this stuff about planning is really good because then you can save or spend appropriately based on how long you're going to live, and that's great. What I would say is this motion is a false sense of security, right? Because recognize in the info slide, it says you can still die from non-natural causes like murder and accidents, right? So it could still be the case that you're like, well, it's good, I'm going to save a bunch of money now, no thank you, and have a nice retirement, right? Because I'd rather have a nice 40-year retirement where I can do all the things I want to do, and then you get hit by a car, right? So that doesn't perfectly solve for that on their side of the house. Furthermore, what we would say is that the best human lives are one where we can balance, no thank you, living in the moment and future possibilities. Important analysis on living in the moment. The future causes humans huge amounts of anxieties, right? See, no thank you, the midlife crisis, and now the newly invented quarter-life crisis, right? Why do these things happen? It happens because we feel like we're running out of time, right? We feel a social pressure of tick boxes of things that we are supposed to have accomplished at a particular moment in our lives. Not doing these things makes us feel incredibly inadequate, right? So the more time you have to plan your life, no thank you, the more likely I think you are to trigger those kinds of feelings in people literally all the time, right? Because what we would argue from closing opposition is that expectations are one of the huge things that cause disappointment, right? So if you expect that you're going to live for like 80 years and then you contract HIV/AIDS, no thank you, and then what you do is that you don't live for that long, you're way more disappointed than if you didn't know that to begin with. No thank you. Furthermore, what we would say, is that if you expect to have a really good retirement and then for whatever reason you don't, then you're much worse off than if you didn't have that expectation to begin with. The more planning you do about the future, the more disappointed you are when those plans don't come to fruition for various kinds of reasons.
Yeah, on this.
Back half.
Yeah, isn't that really worse on your side of the house when everyone creates a grand illusion and a lie of a brilliant expectation that is doomed to collapse for those individuals at some point anyway?
No, and the reason why is because people invest in relationships and invest in other things, right? So so on their side of the house, they're speaking as though people are already in happy relationships, people already have children, people already have these things. Emma and I are going to prove to you why those things are meaningfully worse on their side of the house. So the first thing, no thank you. The first thing is that you might be like, okay, well, I want to have the maximum amount of time with my children. Like, I want to have children when I'm like 24 and have like 60 years with them, and it's going to be amazing, right? So then what happens is you need to find someone to have those children with, right? Which means that you are looking, and now we also have to, apparently we're going to match up ages and stuff as well. So you're looking for someone with the same life expectancy as you. No, thank you. What I would say is that love is beautiful, love is fantastic, and that, no, thank you, that you shouldn't, like, people, the more people try to control for the person they fall in love with, often the less happy they are in those relationships, right? Like, if you're just saying, I need to find a wife, then, like, that doesn't bring you to the amazing amount of love that, no thank you, when you actually look for someone just that you have things in common with, right? And beyond your death date, right? So, no thank you. So I think that, yeah, so like whenever you're just doing things, no thank you, because of social pressure, right? So like, for example, if you're like, oh, everyone I know isn't a virgin, so I need to lose my virginity too, so then you go have sex with a random person because you feel the social pressure to do it, your life is worse, right? That sex is probably worse than if you had it with someone who loved you and cared about you and wanted to make it a good experience. OG.
Sure, so there are 90-years who die of hunger because they just didn't think they were going to live that long when they were saving. Surely this reality is more important than like any assertions about how people think, which are probably variable based on people anyway.
Okay, so this is a weighing debate, right? So what we are weighing here is that there are some people who are bad at saving, who governments solve for in the present, right, through Social Security and old age pensions, right, versus fundamentally changing the way that people engage in all forms of relationships, right? Because recognize some other stuff about children, right? Children are very expensive. And when you're young, you're very selfish, right? And you don't want to spend money on children. But if you have a child by accident, for example, because the problem is that you might underestimate how important in a relationship with a child could be, right? So the thing is that, like, when you have, like, your relationship with your child could fundamentally be magic, it could be amazing, but it's not in your plan, right? So you kick it out, you're selfish, you're young, you don't want to do it, right? The second thing is you might not want to harm your children. You might be like, wow, I have a short death date, I'm going to die when I'm 60, I don't want to cause harm to that other human. Even if that possible future human, the love that you had with them as their parent could have been the most meaningful part of their lives and their existence, right? We now stop that from happening because people might be risk averse and might not want to cause harm to others, right? So we think we also get that. Furthermore, you can also strain relationships with children because if you know you only have 10 or 15 years with that child and you need to teach them a particular set of values, then that relationship is incredibly strained and isn't one that is naturally progressing of love, right? Humans are fundamentally more scared of the future. When we spend less time living in the moment, we are dramatically less happy than if we are worrying about the future. We think a world where you're told your death date is one where you're constantly worrying about the future. We think that those people's lives are meaningfully worse for all these reasons we oppose.
Thank the speaker very much for remarks and call upon the proposition vote to conclude the case for second reading.
I think the response we get from DLO to POI that I give, which says that death is scary, and it's a thing that we try not to think about, and it's a thing that we try and avoid, is quite useful for us. Because I think in a lot of situations we do try and avoid thinking about it, but we can't. Because there are times some of us are paralyzed in our bed because we worry when we will die, what will happen. We worry when our parents will die, what will happen. We worry how much time we will have left with them, and how much time we will have to spend with our family. And we've all been in that horrible situation. So I think the thing is, death is scary and it's terrifying. But we have to create a culture and a climate where we get used to dealing with it at a younger age, where we discuss it with our parents and talk about it. We know when they're going to die, but we can handle it and be equipped for it. Because, okay, maybe it's sad for you that you now can't have a kid because you know you're going to die in 5 years' time, but it's so much better for your partner,
for your child, for the rest of society, than the heartache and pain that you will cause when your parent dies and you have nowhere else to go. That was not a thing we were happy to stand for in closing Gov. I'm going to talk about two things in the speech, the state and the individual. Before that, some responses to closing opposition. So, one thing we're told is that you get a false sense of security because you think you're going to live for a particular period of time. I disagree with this. I think if I know that unless I fuck up, I'm going to live to a certain age, I have a massive incentive to increase my individual security. So I don't go and do something reckless, like, I don't know, try and join a gang because I feel like I'm in an impoverished neighbourhood and I can't make it out and I can't survive. Because I know actually, if I live my life well, and if I stay in school, then those terrible consequences won't go to me. Because in a lot of situations, when you are in desperation, I think you underestimate how much time you actually do have left. And actually, this encourages you to be sensible. We also hear this from OO as well, right, when they say you're going to start spending really recklessly. I'm unclear why this is true, because if I know I have 5 years left, why don't I budget for those 5 years effectively, as opposed to like spending it all in a casino on that one night? Because I still know I have 5 years left. And if those 5 years are now more valuable to me, because they're all the time I have left in the world, I want to budget and allocate for those 5 years effectively, so I don't spend like 4.5 of them in absolute poverty. So the third thing is, we're told that it's sad when your plans don't come into fruition, because you plan for your retirement, but then you get hit by a car. Trend in POI is being like, but that's the problem, right? Because right now, you don't know what's going to happen to you, and then it all suddenly happens. So this illusion they wanted to happen to you, and they said was good, is what the big harm is, because you get to the end of your life and realise you haven't done any of the things that you want to do. But also, all that stuff about you irrationally doing stuff. So I irrationally go out and have sex because I have like 1 year left or whatever. We think the whole idea when you create a culture, when you discuss this with your family and your parents and society, and you introduce the concept of it, you stop making those risky decisions, because it isn't a heat of the moment decision. It's thing you are accustomed for and acclimatized to deal with for a very long time. The comparison is, if you found out you had a terminal illness and you had a week left to live, you might do that. When you have years left or more time and you've got accustomed to it, that's not the case. So firstly, on the state. OO, so the state has no incentive to provide money for people who will die soon. This would suggest governments don't provide palliative care or any care for the elderly because they're going to die soon. Why is this stupid? 3 reasons. Firstly, because you can vote right now, and politicians care about immediate votes in immediate elections. That means they have an incentive to care for you, because if not, you will not vote for them. That's why the retirement, like in the elderly in the UK, they keep getting us the winter fuel allowance, and the elderly are like, oh my god, give it to us, and we keep doing it because they can vote at least for 5 more years. They'll give them a monopoly in a lot of cases. Secondly, because everyone will have a friend and family member in this position. So like, if I know Trent is going to die in like a year, I probably care about him to some extent. So like, I probably don't want him to have no welfare or state agency, so I probably do something. Thirdly, and I'm very proud here trying to run a left-wing case, probably spent too much time with me, but like, people aren't terrible and don't have no emotions and probably do care to some extent about people failing. Otherwise we'd never give to the poor, people worse than us, the welfare state would collapse. OG also never give any response to this case, so like, if we're weighing up top half, like, you probably buy OO at this point, which means that we win against them on that. I think we're from OO now.
Sure. Yeah, so death becomes less scary. If you see it as a rational thing, you'll probably have to deal with it at 80. But what becomes scary and hopelessness is when you're adapting to that hopelessness, which limits your possibility and just makes you miserable every day that's much longer and continuous.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think this is true, because I think that if you allocate for a certain period of time, and you know you're going to die at a certain point, it isn't helplessness, it becomes something that you rationalise and adjust and you cope with. I think it's when you find out with a little bit of time left that it becomes that irrational, scary decision, because you can process it. Like, also, your case was that you know you're going to die at a certain age anyway, or roughly within a certain age bracket. We say it's within that age bracket that creates that, like, terror and uncertainty, but otherwise you would have the same harms as us. So, secondly, on the individual, I won't say a small group, sorry, I just love this, we've got so many American words, I love British American competition, we have like potentiality, like you never hear that in the UK. A small group lose their potentiality from uncertainty. So let's go through some examples again. Firstly, employers won't hire you. OG said you have to give this information to the state. Unclear why you have to give it to your employer. But also, if you can still work for 10 years, like not every employer is like, I need to have you for 50 years. If you can work for 5 years in a company, unclear why they care about that much. Secondly, parents will ignore their dying child, and instead they will go to the child that will live longer. Like, ask any parent who's killed with a terminal illness, if they suddenly go, well, you know, you've got less potentiality left, so screw you, kid, I'm going to spend more time with other kids. No, you have to value that time more, and then when you look back on your kids passing afterwards, you feel so grateful for the time that you had. Thirdly, you can't find a partner to marry. I would like, if my partner, to not have to deal with my death. I would like to not have to have children who suffer in future consequences. If I can't find a partner to marry, that is a better world for me and society than the mass suffering that's caused by my partner for my death. But also, I think you can match up those age brackets. Oh, sure, you can.
Okay, yeah, but surely like the amount of love that people could feel in that relationship could outweigh the harm of losing it.
I mean, it isn't just the love harm that will occur, it's the massive economic harms that will occur when your partner suddenly dies and then you haven't got that income that you rely on. Let's say you're a housewife and you're relying on your husband to earn that money for you. If he dies, you can be entirely fucked, as can your children in these situations. And there's the mass heartache. Because if you've got like 3 kids, right, they're all going to feel that heartache from you, but there's some love you could get. So just on net, we're winning on this. Then I've addressed stuff on risky decisions. So, why do I think that death is a scary thing that we should think about? Because we have to think about it anyway. We have to process it and we have to deal with it because it's going to occur to all of us. But why is it better that we think about it now in a rational way than we think about it in an irrational way? Because we think that when it happens in an irrational way, that is when we get to the point where we are absolutely terrified about it on our deathbed. That is the point when, if you're elderly, right, you know any day could be the day that you die. So every time you step out onto the street, you could want to make a risky decision or do something terrible because any day you could die. You don't know how many phone calls you have left with your children or how many experiences you get to have left with the people that you love. I would rather someone spent time with me because they knew I was going to die, even if that was the only reason they were doing it. They're never spending time with me at all, which is a comparative we have to talk about. I always think that open government don't prove a lot of this stuff, and therefore because we feel a lot of peaceful links in this situation, vote for closing government. Thank you.
I think the speakers remarks and call for the opposition to this. Thank you.
Everyone in this debate today agreed that people are entitled to a life. That it's not about your quantity of life, because that's the same on both sides, but it's about the quality, the meaningfulness that that life consists of. From opening, we had the idea that when you can plan better, you can get that family, you can go on those ski holidays. From closing, we also had the idea that an urgency would ensure that you find that meaning. And that is why our extension was fatal for the other side. Because what we told you is that when you have this knowledge, you lose the ability to get those meaningful experiences, that the knowledge ruins those experiences for you. So yes, you can plan that ski holiday, but it doesn't mean the same as it did before. Okay, so firstly I'm going to reiterate our extension because that wasn't responded to, and speaking about accessing those meaningful experiences. Then I'm going to speak about like what it really is, the fear of death, and then finally I'm going to be speaking about like extraneous rebuttal from a few like counters that we had on their side. So firstly, let's speak about actually accessing those experiences. And here we think they were quite flippant. They said, well, you can just like settle with somebody, you can like run towards whoever you want to be with. What we told you instead is that when you have this plan in your mind, you no longer live in the moment, but instead you become obsessed with ticking boxes or these kinds of experiences. We gave you a few problems with this. We told you, or Patricia told you, that the 35-year-old who drops out of work becomes incredibly isolated because they're trying to chase dreams, but they're not actually participating in life as a normal person. We told you that we told you that, for example, when you're so fixed on your plan of like finding the woman who will be your wife, you are less likely to explore options and create authentic relationships because instead she's just a means to an end of you living your perfect life. But also what we added is that it is very difficult to decide what the most meaningful life is. And what Patricia told you is that these plans create expectations which you are then disappointed when you don't achieve. So if you think I'm only going to live till 35, I need to get my PhD by 30, but then you don't get into the PhD, you are going to be destroyed. Meanwhile, if you think like I could pass away at any stage, so I'm going to live in the illusion that I'm going to live a long time and find various types of meanings, you don't have that kind of urgency, and so you can actually enjoy experiences instead of being tied to that thing. Again, Patricia told you that when you feel like you're doing something, not because of its inherent value, but because you are ticking some box or it's because of a pressure, you're less likely to enjoy it. So she said when like you have social pressure, right? You're less likely, and you lose your virginity because everyone else is doing it, you're less likely to enjoy that experience than if you are living in the moment. When they tell us about planning, that is a euphemism for the idea that people will no longer be living in the moment because instead they will be planning their like specific set of lives. But those come with incredible harms. And finally, and this was particularly their problem, what we told you is that people will never enter into these relationships because they will try and self-preserve. And this is different from what Opening said, because what they spoke about is you're not going to get into relationships because like you want to hope that you will live forever. What we told you is quite different. We told you that when you know that somebody is going to die, you're going to try and avoid those like harsh moments by not having kids in the first place, or by not entering into that relationship in the first place. So while Opening was like, oh, you'll have your loved ones, but it won't be as great, we said you won't even have those loved ones by your deathbed because you're not going to enter into those relationships because you are afraid of that kind of struggle. But we told you that being flexible is what, like, spontaneous love is actually what creates value, right? That people are going to be ignoring the community they could have had if they were working, ignoring the love they could have had if they were more versatile about it, and instead chasing these ends that they're not actually going to be able to achieve because it's difficult to be like, 1, 2, 3, go find your meaning in life. I'll take closing.
You. Isn't this all much worse when you don't have a sense of urgency, so you don't create a plan at all? So rather than having a slightly lower caliber experience, you don't even set about experiencing it in the first place because you've created a grand illusion that pays off in 20 years when you only actually have 5 or 10.
Okay, well, the first thing is that we agree with Opening when they say that we're speaking mostly about people who find out that they're going to die incredibly early, right? And in these instances, it's those kinds of people who are going to avoid these good relationships and not have people by their deathbed and not have equality for the rest of their life because they're acting in this way. But importantly, when you get to like the average person, and this takes us on to the second issue, which is like, what is the fear of death really? What we tell you about the average person is that generally we're not thinking about death every day. We have this idea, and everyone like overestimates how long they're going to live. We have this idea that we are safe, and what that allows us to do is actually enjoy the experiences that we are having. I'll take Opening.
Cool. So for some people, their holiday's probably ruined by an existential fear of death, like you guys say. For some people, it's probably improved by the serenity of knowing when they're going to die. Ultimately, we have no idea, no ability to gauge which group is larger and smaller. Isn't it better they have more of those holidays at all, don't slavishly work, as we said?
All right, so if our fear of death was like measured by how certain we were that it would occur, we told you that people aren't going to be afraid of death in the first place because we all know that it will happen at one stage, that there will potentially be 2 or 3 days where we come face to face with the fact that we will die. But however, I think that most people would prefer to live daily without that hanging over them, and in fact have the optimism, and they like even like their own examples led to this, that when you see a sunset, it's not your last sunset and so you need to tick that box, but rather it's something that you can actually enjoy. And here I think they even conceded to this, because I gave Opening a POI saying, do you think that people with terminal illnesses are still scared? And they said, yes, right? Because having that deadline doesn't make death less scary, because what is actually scary about death is the idea, as Patricia told you, that we are just going to disappear and that we don't know what is going to happen after that point. So what we told you is that it is much better to be living in the moment thereafter. And importantly, when they tell us about all of this planning, what that means is that people are having to to quote the Opening opposition, they said, we make the future real. We tell them that they make the future too real. It's putting that in people's consciousness when they would actually be happier with a kind of illusion. We think it is even good for people with terminal illnesses and for their families to have hope right until the certainty of the very end. That that's not a bad thing, right? That it means that you're able to enjoy time with that person more continuously, etc. But then finally, in terms of extraneous rebuttal, what we told you when they speak, like they had a whole lot of marginal things. We think when you're speaking about risky behaviors, those who really seek risky behaviors are those who think that they're going to die of purposeful deaths, like gun violence in these places where gangs happen, right? On average, people don't do these risky behaviors because they hope that they'll get the average life expectancy. And finally, when you're speaking about loved ones around a deathbed, what we want to ensure is that people have the kind of experiences where those loved ones are actually there. Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
Thanks, speakers, for their remarks. Ask you guys to press the shaking hands in the room. Panel B, if you